Okay, so hello everyone. Thank you for coming today. I'm Nagal Khan. I'm the director of the Center for Mindfulness Science here, and really happy to be hosting Dr. Carlos Warter today. Dr. Warter just got off an airplane a few days ago from Europe and is a little bit, you can tell what you want to tell, but just a little bit under the weather. And so, it's going to be sitting, and it's just really very generous of him to be here despite going through some challenging current health issues. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Not only for coming to begin with, but coming even with the challenges. And one of the main reasons I decided to host Dr. Warter giving a talk for us today, it's kind of an extension of these last few lectures we've been doing on the science of psychedelics, healing, medicine. Dr. Warter has a much kind of longer perspective on this than most anyone around, because he was present and very actively engaged with, collaborating with the folks who were essentially not just practicing, but establishing the practices associated with the first psychedelic movement in the West, which certainly is not related to the first psychedelic movement in humanity that goes back centuries, but in the modern West, which is after the late 50s when Maria Sabina gave psychedelic mushrooms to Gordon Wasson, and Albert Hofmann discovered LSD. And then by the late 50s and into the 60s, both scientists and physicians in Western medical establishments were starting to really look at these agents. We're now in the midst of what is called often in the kind of modern press, the psychedelic renaissance, and it really refers to a kind of second coming of interest and engagement and active scientific exploration and clinical exploration of the benefits and dangers of psychedelics. And so Dr. Warter can speak about both his experience as a witness and player in the initial psychedelic movement, as well as perspective on what's going on now with this renaissance of interest. And I don't know all the details he's going to share with us. We haven't gone over all of that, but I do know, I do know that in addition to his medical degree as a psychiatrist, actually was trained in Chile. He's also got a PhD in transpersonal psychology, which is a kind of unique thing for medical doctors to have. And I think very important and relevant area of understanding to bring to bear on the use of psychedelics clinically, and has been writing about and practicing within this domain of psychosynergy, a non-dualistic paradigm regarding the integration of psychology and spirituality for some years. He's also developed a process called the psycho-spiritual integration process, which is a multifocal healing process for our daily life struggles, and has been teaching summits globally for over 50 years, combining the wisdom of ancient spiritual practices with modern day science and medicine. So again, thank you so much for being with us. Yeah.
So when Dr. Khan said that he didn't know what I was going to be sharing,
I made this sign. It didn't mean peace. It meant it makes us two. Let me introduce it by saying that I was an assistant professor while I was in medical school of embryology. And in 1965, I was supposed to give a class. And I prepared it. I prepared it for a week. I prepared it the weekend. I prepared it. I recorded it, and probably none of you were born when reel-to-reel tapes existed, Grundig machines. You got one. And this was a new medical school, a new nursing school. This was a school of nurses. And here you have 200 nurses sitting in miniskirts in 1965. Now you weren't born. And I'm very well prepared to give this class. And all I see is miniskirts and miniskirts and miniskirts and miniskirts. So I forgot. So I forgot what I had to say. So I spoke about the value of education and the importance of the nursing profession next to the medical profession in the field of service, in the field of helping others come to health. And from that day on, I said, I'm never going to prepare anything. And Dr. Khan is so academic that I began to think in the last few days, what should I say and what shouldn't I say? So since, as he said, I'm not going through a very good moment in my health right now, I came in a few moments late, but I made it on time because I was being booked for a CAT scan for tomorrow for my heart. I was on a plane 6 days ago and they gave me oxygen and it was very hard to make it. Now, I turned 77 a few days before that, so I don't know if it comes with the territory or not. But here I am, and Dr. Khan said a few hours ago, if we want to cancel it, they wouldn't want to cancel it. Here I was in these wonderful highways of Los Angeles, you know, bumper to bumper, getting here. My wife was driving, fortunately, because I definitely wouldn't have made it. I definitely wouldn't have made it. This, I don't know how you guys live with this. Anyway, when I was part of Dr. Hoffman's 100th birthday celebration, he said something that I would like to start by sharing with you. And he said that the spirit of the molecule of LSD came to him and made him aware that not only did those substances which are derived of plants have a spirit, have a consciousness, but this chemical product had a spirit that communicated to him that LSD was to make a socio-cultural revolution, and this socio-cultural revolution had intended to change the world. Now, this was in this century, in 2006, I think it was, in Basel, in Switzerland, where Dr. Hoffman lived. And it was a very touching moment to begin to understand what, in my studies in the East, with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, or with Swamis, gurus, yogis, and all these other human beings that have no doubt that everything is conscious, and that consciousness is the prevailing background where we exist, and that our Western scientific traditions have made us a little alien to it, since we think that to be conscious is just to be woken up from the slumber of the night before. It really means being awake. It really means coming present with all that is. And that's how my skepticism began around 60 years ago. I wrote my first book 55 years ago. At this stage of the game, 55 or 60 don't make a difference. At your stage of the game, 5 years probably make a difference. Ever heard of Pablo Neruda? So I'm from Chile, and Pablo Neruda is from Chile, and a friend of mine is from Chile. And I went through an interesting experience that I consigned in a journal, and my friend took the journal to Neruda, and I didn't know where the journal went, only to find out when I got a phone call, somebody said at the other side of the phone, Carlos? I said, yeah, who is this? Pablo. Pablo who? Pablo Neruda, in his musical voice. And I said, Pablo Neruda? Calling me? Yes, what can I do for you, sir? I read your work. I thought it was worthwhile publishing. I got you a publisher. I wrote you a preface, and it's ready to go. I'll never forget, I was in my parents' house, in that which had been my room, looking out into a park that was across the street. 6 months later, I had a bestseller, and I hadn't finished medical school yet. Of course, the bestseller was because Neruda prefaced it. I won't take credit for what I wrote. But definitely, it was a moving step in my writing career. A year later, I had written a poetry book. I called it Fragment 70, and now you know it was in 1970. And I'm speaking with the publisher, or the probable publisher, who is more interested if I can get another preface of Neruda. Definitely I couldn't. He was the ambassador of Chile under Allende, if you remember that, in France, and was very sick at the time already. And the publisher asked me if I had taken a psychedelic to write what I wrote. Now, I was a good medical student. I hadn't even smoked nor inhaled anything. And I was offended. Psychedelic? Me? No. This is my natural way. And he said, well, you should try it sometime. And I want to introduce you, he said, to a psychiatrist who has a group. And if you ever heard of Claudio Naranjo, ever heard of Claudio Naranjo? Claudio was a psychiatrist that had done a very interesting journey in bringing LSD to the ayahuasqueros in the Amazons. So the ayahuasqueros were very surprised that when he gave them this little invisible almost substance, they were having a journey that was similar in nature to the ayahuasca. You've heard of ayahuasca, correct? Who's tried ayahuasca here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 30%. Okay. Where? In South America or here? Both. Santo Daime or Icarus? Both. So I had spent a year in Harvard and was back in Chile on a vacation. And I decided that instead of returning there, I was going to explore that. And that set me off in the next 55 years of a path. My interest wasn't psychedelics, nor is it today. There's one book there that's called Psychedelia, which has nothing to do with psychedelics in case you were thinking of purchasing it. I'm going to disappoint you. It has nothing to do with psychedelics. It has to do with the states of consciousness that one can access through psychedelics or through meditation or through inspiration or through naturalness. Because as it's been recently published, recently I mean in the last couple of weeks, the more superposition of connectivity in our brain exists, the more a possibility of what we call mystical states gets elicited in our brain. And that we really don't need to add anything to ourselves because we're already ready-made to experience the greatness of our spiritual identity, of our spiritual beingness. And therefore, this new second renaissance in my lifetime of the psychedelic movement needs to have a warning that we do it in such a way that we don't give our power away to the means, but maintain the power of our existence and that which meditators from all places and all times have experienced. I was speaking with Dr. Khan yesterday about the format of what we're going to do, and I'd like to alter it, if I may, a little bit. I would like to be interrupted. And I would like, yes, what do you have to say?
I was just interrupting.
Oh, okay. I would like to be interrupted with meaning
Oh, thank you.
and with purpose.
Much better.
So if I say something that you want to argue, discuss, yes.
So you need to bring caution with the psychedelic in this second movement. I didn't quite hear what you said.
Well, I've saw the first Renaissance, and in the first Renaissance, let me do it in a paradigmatic way. I had an acupuncture session 2 weeks ago in Cordoba, Spain. And this person had studied acupuncture for many years. And you could see that he knew what he was talking about and what he was doing. And he said, there is no legislation, no regulation in Spain. Somebody can take a weekend workshop and call him or herself an acupuncturist and go out and work. That's the same warning I want to say, because I saw the collapse of the first Renaissance, 1960s, early 70s, because anybody that had an experience became an expert, and that seems to begin to happen today too. There needs to be some countenance to whoever sits or is a sitter that goes beyond being a high school graduate. And doesn't mean that he needs to have a PhD, but needs to have the experience, needs to know that when one is of service to somebody else, in sitting for somebody else, one has to have journeyed through those. And that's what I meant. But what else? Yes.
On that, there is facilitator programs out there that are licensing people in Oregon. Do you think the current education of those facilitators is proper?
I have a student who was my student in what I teach, which is more of a practical spirituality than the psychedelic spirituality, who just got a master's degree and who has joined one of those groups. And I spoke to one of those groups. And I have my concern that anything goes these days. Have I said enough?
Well, just the facilitator that are training the facilitator. We're speaking from personal experience,
Yeah.
that we don't feel that the people that are actually training the facilitators to be licensed are actually educated enough in the spiritual space.
Yes,
If that makes any sense.
I tend to agree with that perspective. And it's of concern because the powers that be, as reflected by this committee that spoke to the FDA 10 days ago, and saying that MDMA has a risk of high blood pressure or other side effects that many other approved medicines do have. And they're not going to be condemned to elimination or disappearance just because they're in a black box.
But because there are so many people that are afraid of this, not of this, they're afraid of themselves. They're afraid of waking up. They're afraid of finding out that there is more to life than the conditioning. I call it CCS. Do you know what it stands for? Culturally conditioned stupidity. CCS. And in that regards, anything will or could be used to eliminate this renaissance or this openness or this discovery or this awakening again. And what you were mentioning is my concern too. Yes.
And I'm curious, being an amateur scientist, I can't help but go into spaces and dive in. And I noticed that a lot of psychedelic spaces, whether they're clinically sound or they're indigenously sound, whatever, either direction, they don't engage enough in the political aspect. That being politically active, like for these plants and for nature to activate us to have political power, to understand political power, to not be scared of political power, to step into it. And when I connect with Indian psychedelics, when I've gone back to India and dove into that, in the Sufi entrances, what was very clear to me was, wow, all the ancients, when they practiced these like deep sciences of tuning into your wellness and your harmony and all this stuff and connecting with nature, they became political actors, socio-political actors. Even Jesus may have been inspired, right? And so we have to maybe think about how, forget the whatever, but what if we need a political movement around this, like more grounded and actually expanding into interconnectedness, that any harm somewhere is harm to you, and actually getting the embodied awareness of political power in that way. Anyway, I'm just saying that, what about politics? Like, have you noticed anywhere people are being politically with integrity?
I know that in the early 70s, during the Vietnam days, and the admiration that President Nixon had for the Emperor of Japan when they had kamikazes, maybe crystal methamphetamine driven. You know, remember that? Pilots killing themselves in order to destroy. The CIA, today this is known by everybody, so stop me if I'm repeating anything that you already know, researched the use of certain substances to see if the United States could have kamikazes of their own. That's where the Beatles, Make Love, Not War, wrote, and there were no kamikaze in the US military, and LSD became a forbidden substance. And that was political. On the other hand, you mentioned the Sufis. I happened to live with them for a year of my life in Morocco. I decided to heal myself before I was letting loose with a license to heal others, a license to kill many times. And I lived in Morocco. We didn't use any substances, but at 4 in the morning, we're doing prayer and meditation. And all day long, we're studying how to activate these organs of the body, of sensations and perceptions and action that are asleep. And when one got woken up, then we would progress to the next one. And in that sense, and around what we're talking about, excuse me, to catch my breath. Thank you. The basic education that we have, not just in this country, but everywhere else too, is a conditioning education. We teach our children to fit in, to learn something so that they could have a job, and regardless of the culture they come from, they need to adapt. And once adapted, they will have a survival that, depending on what the society is, and as I mentioned before, I was in Spain recently with a plan. My wife and I were going to stay 3 days at the house where we're going to be invited. Oh, being echoed. And instead of staying 3 days and going again to the Alhambra, who's been in the Alhambra in Granada? I have been there in 1969. We had been together in 1989, and we were going to go again this year. But then I realized that the Palace of the Alhambra didn't need me to continue existing a few more centuries. And I had this experience that I'd like to share succinctly. The first day I arrived to this house, to this friend's house, we were tired. We were taking a long plane from Los Angeles. Oh, this is Los Angeles, yes. From here to Frankfurt, and from Frankfurt to Malaga, and from Malaga in a train to Cordoba. And he sent us, this friend sent us to take a nap, siesta. So we went, lie down, and without inhaling anything, I was taken on a journey. It happens to me quite frequently, and let me connected to the fact that the word book Psychedelia, which I wrote there, the thickest one, has to do with a series of experiences that are personally related in this world or any other world without the assistance of anything. So I'm lying down to take this nap and I can't. But I'm taken into the levels and levels of the profundity of the earth. Layers after layer after layer, 2,500 years back in history. Now, fortunately, I'm a psychiatrist, so I can say I wasn't psychotic. But it looked like a non-ordinary experience for sure. And what I experienced there was that one civilization does not destroy the next one, but the earth swallows and maintains a certain level of vibrational activity that is still present there. So instead of going to Alhambra, instead of going to Sevilla, instead of going anywhere, we stayed instead of 3 days, 3 weeks and 3 days. Thanks God or heavens or whoever you want to believe this week in, we were not kicked out. We were treated with the most beautiful hospitality by this couple that had invited us to come visit. And we had the opportunity of meeting people that embodied these cultures, which I perceived as lying in the bottom of the earth and in layers. Iberians, Phoenicians, Greek, Romans, Jews, Muslims, Carthaginians, you name it. Everybody that had been there left something and it is still there. So instead of doing tourism of that kind, we did human tourism and had a fantastic experience. Questions? Yes.
Wonder what was leading to this experience?
My analytical mind is pretty much dead. When I turned 23, I spent my first 23 years being a good student, a good person, a good everything in the conditioning that I had been. And then I wrote this journal that I was mentioning before that ended up being this book, which I intend to have translated by the 55th anniversary next year. And I stopped analyzing. I became a seeker after truth. And in this seeking, I am still engaged. If you want to.
It's a curiosity.
Okay. If you want to call it that way, I won't argue with you. But I see a big distinction between the processing ability that has a hidden agenda, which is participating in something which allows us to survive, or participating in the exalted experience of living, the magnificent experience of life with its mystery at any moment of its existence. And I like to call that the awareness of the human promise. We have the conditioning, we have the dreams. Let's say somebody is young and says, I would like to be an architect, and studies architecture and builds a beautiful, but that's the dream. But then there is the promise, which is what I was hinting to, what I experienced in Morocco when I was getting up at 4 in the morning to put some toast bread for the 60 people that we were in one same environment, so we would have some breakfast. And then we would do what are called spiritual exercises, meditations, but activations of the blessings that in that tradition, which has been completely neglected if we look at what Islam is today and what Sufism was intended to bring forth. the ability to wake up areas of the system. You want to call it the chakra system if you look at the Indian way, or the latifas or the latifs if you want to look at it in the Muslim way, or whatever way. It has different names, but I like to call it the realization of the human promise, the possibilities of possibilities, the infinity of beingnesses that we can live, that we can embody. And that's where analysis, and I went through psychoanalysis, unfortunately or fortunately, my analyst committed suicide. Not because he had me as a patient. I want to pray that that wasn't so, but his own story. But I went through that system, and I was trained in that system. And when I hear the analytical mind coming present there, I say, yes, I experienced this stupidity. For a Chilean, I was born in Chile. Actually, I wasn't born in Chile. I was born in heaven, but I was delivered in Chile. My parents are Holocaust survivors that went to Chile after World War II, and my mother was 8 months pregnant when she landed in Chile. But in Chile or in Los Angeles or anywhere else, the conditioning that one gets subjected to and becomes skeptic of any other possibility is tremendous. And we have 4 children. They're all old, I would say now. The youngest is in his 20s, and we tried not to have them so conditioned, but to, what's the word they use these days? To live outside of the box, to think outside of the box, to be able to dare to challenge themselves in all that which inadvertently I might have conditioned them. And when Dr. Khan mentioned one of my processes that I called the psychospiritual integration process, or the PIP, or the personal integration process, is based on the consideration that we grow up physically. And you don't have to tell me what it means to be in the 8th decade. It's different than being in the 6th decade or the 4th decade or the 3rd decade of one's existence in this world. But intellectually, we grow up as much as the system allows us to grow up intellectually. And that would be the educational model that we are privileged to partake in, because not everybody gets to be educated intellectually. But emotionally, there is a tremendous emotional retardation going on, that people don't grow up as their body has grown up or as their intellect has grown up. And therefore, the social age is also so much in what's the word? In bondage to the emotional age. That instead of having many Mother Teresas or many people thinking of the heart and love and compassion and understanding and empathy, we think of thoughts. And our emotional intelligence has not developed as much. And therefore, we are immature emotionally. And maybe, if I look at the terms of the human promise, also immature intellectually, next to the possibilities of Heisenberg or Einstein or Schrödinger, or people who have really sharpened their intellectual IQ. And then we have spiritual age, spiritual intelligence, spiritual understanding. And that one has been hijacked by religions. I find much more spirituality in art, in music, than many times in where it has been, and I have nothing against religion, don't get me wrong. It is a very good club to belong to, if you want to participate in that. But the spiritual intelligence and the spiritual aging is something that needs to be developed, needs to be given attention to, and we don't give it sufficient attention. So I designed yesterday, in 1973, a process which brings together these aspects and cleans up the emotional immaturity, so to speak, so that we can progress, and sometimes with the use of these wonderful substances that Dr. Khan said, I was in the previous generation and not in the older generation. I thought, how does he know that I wasn't at the beginning also? We were sitting in caves and we were collecting mushrooms and giving it to each other in order to facilitate a language that would allow us to come together, being to being, instead of thing to think.
You mentioned a number of physicists and their impact on spirituality. I mean, do you think that we're kind of reconfiguring our interpretation of them based on what we'd like to remember of them? Because Schrodinger, despite his amazing inputs, was a complete asshole. And he was that to everybody, his wife, his family, people around him. Heisenberg was a flawed individual. I mean, all of them, they kind of never lived what we try to interpret of them. And
I agree.
so
But
how
the
do we
universe,
this is the dichotomy, I guess, or the para, whatever, of here you have, you know, a spiritual, intellectual pursuit, but on the other hand, Heisenberg, political, middle of Nazism, Schrodinger, they're just people you wouldn't want to be with. Is there something wrong in that picture?
no, but we always organized our reality with our pictures. And we change them according to what current time wants to feel about them. I don't meet them, so I don't know what kind of an asshole they were. So I don't have that personal experience. But I also hear the opinion of other people. But for those minds to have been able to have pierced certain aspects in physics that have changed our viewpoint of how we live, they must have had something developed, even though they could have not gotten along with their wife or couple.
Is that something that we create? I mean, 50 years from now, I may drive through Mississippi and there'll be a statue to Trump. And someone will say, we praise this guy. He protected us. He brought us enlightenment. And you're like, what the fuck's going on here? So
Yes,
are we creating our own consciousness,
always.
you know, based on what we think?
Also, of course.
Yeah.
Of
I mean,
course.
it's, you know, that's the other thing I have you know, when we look at a molecule, I know Hoffman called LSD had its own consciousness, but consciousness is the experience that we shared with it by taking it. By itself, it's not sitting there enlightened in joy and seeing perspective of the universe. It needs, like music, it needs an instrument.
Yeah, but how do you know that it is not so with everything else that we have considered as valid throughout history? We organize our reality based on our experience. And whatever I've said now is just a viewpoint, just one viewpoint among 8 billion viewpoints, not the viewpoint, just another viewpoint. Now, I hope that when we drive in 100 years in the south of the United States, we don't fall into what you mentioned. But we could.
Or we could be proactive and make it now and have it be an awesome like joke museum, you know, that transmutes the energy
But what for?
for fun.
For fun. If you want to have fun with that, be my guest.
I mean, Hindenburg thought Hitler was a joke. We shouldn't joke. It could open up a door to someone doing
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah. And it happens all the time. There were elections in Europe yesterday of the European community. And it's all turned very much to the right of what we call the right. But this ebb and flow is not new. Claudius, the emperor of Rome, who was depressed throughout his whole childhood, looking at his uncle Nero being atrocious, ended up having what we call today, no, don't call it today anymore like that, but what we used to call manic depressive bipolar syndrome. And in one of his manic accesses, he created more aqueducts that are still of value. And that was a manic episode? Or was it a generous episode to bring water? You know, there's a hotel in Cordoba, which is my most recent experience, that shows the aqueduct that was built 2,000 years ago. And it's still used in the making of farmland today. So I'm not going to disagree with you that we create our own realities. I'm not going to agree with you about the labeling of these individuals. I think we can find out for ourselves. And I'm sure some of you would agree that when you find out for yourself, then that is valid for you at that time. And if you're open enough, that can change also. And I'll give you a personal experience, you know, because a lot of people in psychedelic worlds have experiences, journeys that end up being an experience. And in my early years, I had a lot of experiences. And of course, experiences that I had been educated into my belief system before. So I had experiences with Jesus, and I had experiences with Moses, and I had experiences with Krishna and Rama, and so on. And one day, in one of these journeys, I had an experience with Adam and Eve. And I came out of that experience and I couldn't stop laughing. It was a very vivid experience. But then I had to tell myself, now that I've gone to the beginning of Genesis, when am I going to have something that I have not been trained about it or believed in, and have my own inquiry into who am I and what is this all about? And this is many years ago. I wasn't 40, because when I had my 40-year initiation, which I highly recommend that we look at our lifetime and see what initiations are being ushered in different times. And I realized that I wasn't alone in the cosmos, that there were other brothers, cosmic beings of light that existed there, that were not part of any of the cosmographies that I had studied or I had been brainwashed into or made believe. Then life changed, because you are these cosmic sisters and brothers in a different form in this moment, for me right now, in this, I call it dating spirit. Entonces, then I could live my life from a different perspective, a perspective that allowed me more to be open to what life itself wants to present to me, without judging it, without even evaluating it, based on me. My youngest son was telling me the other day something that really rang the bell. He said, whatever I do here, that has no effect on Jupiter. Now, after driving through LA, I understand. He lives here. It has no effect, it's like getting to a specific place. But let me go back to the experiencer, you, I, the one that has the privilege of being, and therefore can be subjected to a learning process that is not the validation or the invalidation of a belief system to which we hang on so dearly sometimes to the point of making war. We make war not so much for territory, even though that could be argued these days, but we make war that are ideological. We want to control the thought process and the belief system of others and ourselves. And that is insane because life becomes at stake. People die because of one not believing. That's what I was telling you before. I'm not going to argue with you. I'm not going to agree with you. I'm not going to disagree. I'm going to respect you. If that's the way you want to frame the reference of your existence, I will say, okay.
Well, I want you to argue with me because that's the intellectual pleasure I get from eating someone of your stature. So it's great to get your perspective.
You mean my physical stature?
Yeah, exactly.
But I don't want to argue with you. I want to navigate with you and accept that your experience is as valid as anyone else's experience. And I understand you're not a Trumpist.
I agree. Argument's the wrong word. Yes.
Right.
Discourse, discussion.
Yes.
Share, guide.
And you know, and that's the base of democracy, that we really share and have differences or have not differences. But ultimately, do we make a difference in Jupiter? Do we make a real difference? And I feel like you're saying political in the real sense, political in the sense that we need to bring forward, I'm having trouble breathing, give me a second. They give me oxygen. Do you have any oxygen here? No. Give me oxygen on Lufthansa. What?
All around you, you're 20%.
You can play the flute, it'll help. It forces you to, breathe.
What was I saying? Anybody paid attention?
Getting back to the political.
Right. We are 8 billion people on the planet, and we really need to take care of what we leave behind us and what we are doing right now. And in that sense, we need to wake up, I think. I respectfully submit that we need to wake up, and not to wake up to an ideology, not to wake up to a belief system. We need to wake up to the inquiry of what are we? What is this really meant to be? The classical questions that have happened centuries and centuries. The Middle Ages had people looking at that. Antiquity had people, and who knows before, when we're sitting in caves, we also wanted to know what and who are we. Yes, you had a question.
On how to educate, how to share, how to co-navigate with society.
That's very ambitious what you just said, because it is vast. Once I became the messenger of peace of the United Nations when I was 40 years old, I decided to become more humble and less ambitious, and realized that I had not such a deep or big power as to change the world. And then I began to tackle your question, working with groups, working with individuals and with groups. And that's my whole work, from psychiatry to education, and from education to co-experiencing, sometimes with the use of substances and sometimes without the use of substances, but always with the use of heartfulness and mindfulness, the possibility of shifting the perspective of the people I run into or work with or come to one of my workshops or retreats or seminars or however they're called in different times. Summits, they're called now, summits. And see if the dialogue that I intend to bring forth here today can make a difference in the sense of enrichment. Not the enrichment that I will provide, but the enrichment that you will provide for yourself by giving yourself permission to acceptance of that which everybody has already, which is humanity. See, we're members of a species. The only species that doesn't seem to be conscious of being a species. You know, I live in 100 miles from here, and I saw a mouse that had died, and I saw ants working together, and they disappeared this cadaver of the mouse in less than a day. They worked together. This is the only species, and I sometimes say what I'm not going to say now, something like, how stupid can we get, that our creativity is in producing weapons that at its best end up in the destructions of our fellow beings. And at its worst has been an industry that has taken out minerals from the earth to be used for nothing. And that needs to change, I think. You know, I don't know that I'm going to see it, but we need to bring, you say how, but by bringing it in the forefront, by bringing us and ourselves and each other in the forefront of importance, that life is more important than, and let me quote the Dalai Lama, we have a lot of intelligent people, we need to have more loving people. We need to bring love more into the fruition of what this life is all about. And when Dr. Khan was texting me and we were navigating, finding a charger for the electric car so that I can go back somewhere and land, and he said, if you want to cancel, it's not what I want to do, but if you want, I said, no, I said I'm going to do it. I came all the way here. I'm going to be here because we have a date in spirit. We haven't met ourselves physically, but for some way, some reason, we come together today. And that's why I wanted to open it more to a question and answer than me telling you something that you already know. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you your thoughts on why this is happening in this time and space. Because there's a concept of the Piscean age, and we're merging into a different frequency of the planet, going into what we refer to in yoga, the Aquarian age.
The Aquarian age.
And your thoughts on that. And it seems to me that there's no coincidence psychedelics have reemerged, and we now have AI at the same time.
Yeah.
One is more thinking and data, and one is more experiential information. I'd love to hear your kind of thoughts on how this maybe reemerged in society, and the kind of the concept of, you know, we work together, which is the Aquarian age concept of thinking and helping and healing and communicating and collaborating instead of competition. It's feminine, it's all of those things. What are your thoughts on how we learn in the future of psychedelics and AI?
And there's a third element, more interest in extraterrestrial consciousness. And the Hubble and the Webb giving us concrete data of what classical mystics have been saying existed for a long time. So the three elements, the artificial intelligence on one level, the astrological and astronomical aspects of it. We're in a state of emergency. We can't continue having Hindenburgs promoting Hitlers and creating destruction. We're too many to allow it. I think that people who have been born in the last 100 years, maybe, at least 90 years for sure, have noticed that they're not here for the first time. I knew a kid that wrote a best-selling book in Argentina back in the 80s or 90s, I don't recall exactly when, that was called I Come from the Sun. And in his description, he says that when he was about to become a baby, all the other becoming babies were lining up next to this angel that he says the angel of forgetting. And the angel of forgetting would kiss everybody, and then they would forget. And he moved his face away when he was about to be kissed, and he remembered. And he wrote this book with drawings in which he could describe that where he had come from was not just the biological, of what we consider the biological result of a sperm and an ova, but a being, a soul. Which leads me to say some words about experiences that I've had since I was a child, but one that I had recently, a few years ago, that falls in the category of a near-death experience. I don't know why they call it near-death experience, given that there is nothing else but life. And it looked like this. I was having dinner with my wife and some friends and cousin of mine and his wife. And suddenly I was, boom, outside of my body, 8 feet above the house or something like that. I didn't measure it exactly, but far out there, looking down, my poor wife freaking out because then she told me that I was blue and I had no pulse and I wasn't breathing. Worse than today, you know, so. Now my experience was that I was in a silver light place that was totally, totally, totally wonderfully peaceful. And I was so happy. I was so happy. It was so beautiful. It was so comforting that I could continue being there. I could have continued navigating that area. When I looked down, but look, my house is not 8 feet. I was 8 feet above the house, and I'm looking through the house, so I'm looking through the solidity of the construction. And I'm seeing my wife being desperate, you know, pushing my body, which I did not feel, or breathing into my mouth, which I did not feel. I was in bliss. I was in total ecstasy without MDMA, in a very beautiful state, in a very beautiful place, without any help. And I only came back because I didn't want her. It was an act of compassion. I didn't want her to have such a bad time. I love her and I didn't want her to feel the desperation that I was seeing. There was only one thing I couldn't do in that place. I couldn't communicate. I could not let them all know that I was fine. Had I been able to let them know that I was fine, I wouldn't be sitting in this body here today. I would have continued the journey.
Did you try?
Yeah.
We were talking.
Yeah, yeah. It was not perceived here. I could perceive what was going on down there, but down there was not perceiving what was going on in here. So I shifted and I came in, and it was freezing. It was so cold. Of course, you know, my heart wasn't beating much and I wasn't breathing, and it was a cold space. And then my cousin had called 911, of course, and the people that came in, and I really felt a lot of empathy for these workers that are so lost in what they're dealing with that the first thing they said, well, he had a heart attack. And I said, no, I didn't have a heart attack. Heart attacks come with pain. I had no pain at all. Oh, we'll take him to the hospital. I said, really don't want to go to the hospital. I'm fine, you know. I'm warming up now with a blanket. And of course, you know, I had to go. I went. So I'm in the ambulance, and they're trying to put an IV, and I say, right side. No, we do it at the left side. He said, my vein at the left side is not good. Go the right side. So they try, poke me a few times on the left side, don't find the vein, and I'm seeing my blood pressure is down. So I remembered that we teach patients the technique when the blood pressure is high to lower it. So I told this body the opposite. When it was low, to heighten it. And here it began to come up. I did the opposite meditation. And then this guy says, would I try the right side? Then they take me to the hospital, and the physician there says, did you drink anything? Did you smoke? Did you have a lot of alcohol? The standard operating procedures of ignorance. Did you indulge in something? I said, the only thing I want to indulge is going home. No, we have to keep you here under observation. I said, I'll observe myself. And I went home. And then my wife didn't want to let me go to a lecture that I had to give in San Jose, Northern California. And she insisted I get an EEG. So I went to get an EEG, but I knew that if I meditate, it's going to be balanced. It's not going to be a sign of stroke. If I go deep into meditation, it's going to be fine. So I could go to the conference, and I went. It was fine. But how do we get into a near-death experience? Because I've had the good fortune in my life to be at the edge of these two, or what we call two worlds or two avenues of existence, with a purpose. And maybe the purpose is to remind you that you might have had those experiences too, and that you need to take them seriously with yourself and honor them, because that's why you're here, to honor those experiences which are transcendent, so that we can transcend them and include that in this time, and not forgotten your question, that in this time we need to really get it together so that we don't continue repeating the same mistakes that we are repeating. So whether you want to consider is that we're in the end of the Piscean age and the beginning of the Aquarian age, or that we have, I wrote a book, it's called About Extraterrestrials and the Nature of Reality. And it's not in English, it's in Brazil, in Portuguese, and in more open countries, so to speak. Spain, Brazil. That we need to activate in our human promise that area of our brain which can understand these things without making it a big fuss or making a big fuss out of it. And that the activation of our frontal lobe allowed us to speak and understand spoken language and use it. Well, the activation of other areas in our brain might, hopefully, allow us to understand that what we call extraterrestrial is not really something out there, but it's something in here that is not the terrestrial brain. Anybody speak Spanish here? The pedestrian brain, pedestre. The brain that is above the pedestrian brain, that allows us to understand that we function multidimensionally. And in this multidimensionality that is not taught in high school and not taught in grammar school, is not taught in college even, we need to activate. And that's what I consider the human promise. So this human promise is ready to be explored. And that's been my interest in the last decades.
As you bring up a near-death experience, I think about how so many the deep dives into plant medicines all over the world are kind of getting folks close to the experience. Even shamanic experience that without psychedelics can do that too, right? It's like dancing all night, for example, and all kinds of stuff. And so I wonder if like plant medicines as a vehicle to like break down the identity and the ideology, right? Then to do something with that. Like what would that do, right? Like if the ideology was broken down, then it was like, all right, now here's some call to actions. Here's how we do call to action from that place.
And a lot of people, at least in the work that's being done in the East Coast, in Johns Hopkins, with mushrooms, in people that are close to dying because they have a ending disease, some terminal cancer or any of those, with the help of mushrooms, lose the anxiety that is so well promoted towards death. We're so afraid of dying, and we're all afraid of dying. Don't get me wrong. We're all afraid of dying. But once we have an experience that transcends that, we're less focused on it. I like to say that I have not seen many children carrying their placenta around, or the umbilical cord, Here they're beginning to walk and now they have an umbilical cord. Now, we don't need this body either when we cross over to a different, I wouldn't say form, but domain of existence, another kingdom. We don't need this body.
When you speak about fear, I think about the past few years, how we've all been kind of hypnotized to be just constantly living in fear, and social media pushes it, and even all of our conversation within our communities, everybody's just talking about fearful things. And then they do the psychedelics, but then they do it in a nice place in the jungle, a nice place in a beautiful house. And they come back to just talking about what they're scared of because there's a hypnosis. How do you think that plant medicine can play a role in breaking people out of hypnosis so they can do something?
Well, you just said it.
You towards the beginning of the talk, you were talking about your concerns with the training of modern practitioners of psychedelics.
I would see when we call them practitioners and experts and all this.
Well, I don't know what else to say. I mean, what words to use? There's so many different words, shaman or guru, whatever you want to call it. But I was wondering if you had any advice for healers that want to harness the therapeutic power of psychedelics, but minimize the harm to the patient on one hand, but also on a global scale, be good stewards for this powerful medicine.
Prioritize not being a healer, not being a shaman, not being a guru, not being anything, but being. And explore. And when we explore within ourselves, we might be of use to somebody else. Might. No guarantee either. But we need to take our life seriously. We need it not become a job. In this last trip that I took to Europe, I saw America, the United States more than America, as a factory. Everybody has a job. Everybody's working hard. Everybody's doing a lot of things. And very few are being. And the priority of respecting one's own life has been eradicated in a certain way. So when you ask that question about how these experts, who is an expert anyway? Of what? Of breathing? I wish. So if we want to be of help to others, we need to take care of ourselves. We need to love others. We need to love ourselves. And that's not highly promoted. Nobody gets paid to be a good lover of oneself. So we need to reorient, I think, We need to reorient the priorities. You know, as I was telling you in passing before, I have this student who, I don't know, he's an engineer or a software guy, and he did very well in his business. And now he became a master's in psychology. And he thinks that because he got a degree, he's a master's in psychology. But he needs to do this human doingness that we're so addicted to. Is so dramatic because it doesn't lead to a respectful place within. It leads to a positioning in society. And once I was in an ashram in India, and there was a guy that had fever. And I ran to get him an aspirin. And he said, no, thank you. And I said, you need an aspirin. You are flying in fever. And he said, save it for someone who could need it more than me. I'll never forget that. This was like a long, long time ago. The willingness to put the other one first, at the same time as putting one's own development first, because we need to take care of ourselves so we can take care of another. But I don't know if I've answered what you wanted. Yes.
Dances are pins and curves, and it's in sharing your story and listening to others' stories, because in those shared experiences, each person is an absolute individual, and each experience and how they've healed themselves is always individual. And what might help me might not help you, but if I shared my story, it might help or at least inspire an idea or some tool that person could use in order to heal themselves. And it's in the listening, and I think that's a lot of times, even especially in the medical world, you already just shared your experience of them not listening to you. You know your body, I don't. And you said to use this side, and they still went ahead and didn't listen to you and went with the other side, and it didn't work. And then they went with what you actually said because you knew your body. And I feel like, as my question then would be to you, in tapping onto his, as far as experts and facilitators, what about the medical experts and the doctors and the people with the degrees that are also should be trained in these types of modalities to share with their patients? How do you train them to listen on an individual basis rather than this over umbrella of prescription method model of we'll just shift these, or some doctors have so many patients that they don't have the time to really actually listen to the person and all of the modalities, because it might not just be one ailment. You take into the account all of the different ailments and all of the different factors, the age, the hormonal levels, blood sugar, their nutrition, all of that. When is that something that could change in the Western medicine teachings in order to incorporate that, to actually have a more individualized, personalized healing modality with someone, whether they're an expert or a doctor or a professional?
As you were saying what you were saying, I got reminded to a gift that once the Dalai Lama gave me. And the gift was, see my doctor. So I met his doctor. His doctor took my pulse, 45 minutes on the left side and 45 minutes on the right side. Didn't say a word, not that I would have understood anyway, Tibetan. And then told someone to mix some grains for me and gave them to me. He didn't know a word, at least that I could understand, about hormones or about even my clinical history. I felt better when he took my pulse. This is like a long time later, And as you were giving that example, what popped into my memory bank was, boom, that man. Remember? Now, the Western model is very, very broken. We have insurance medicine, unfortunately, or maybe helping some, maybe. I don't want to knock it. But I'll give you one vignette here. I have a primary care physician. God bless him. And some spirits go into him so he wakes up someday. If it's not in this lifetime, in another lifetime. In paraphrasing the words that you used before, the guy is an ass. Really, he's an ass. Give you a concrete example. Years ago, maybe 6 years ago, I told him that I had a backache. And he told me that it's normal at my age to have backaches.
Oh my God.
I said to myself, there's something going on here. And I did my own research and I diagnosed myself a cancer, which I had, for which I got treated in my own mentality and of which I'm free. 3 years clean. But when I went through chemotherapy, I went through everything, and I have a book that I didn't bring, that if you get a chance to look at it, it's called Who Do You Think You Are? I recommend that book, and I recommend a pyramid that I call the Pyramid of Healing, which has at the base of the pyramid everything that works. Ayahuasca, chemotherapy, meditation, prayer, surgery, everything at this baseline that can help, use it. If it helped somebody, it might help somebody else. So I went to see him, and he asked me how I was doing. I said, doing better, I said. He said, what do you mean better? And I said, you misdiagnosing me, and I'm very mad at you. And he said, what are you going to do? Well, I'm thinking if I'm going to report you to the Board of Medicine or the university only. Oh, please don't do that. I have a 4-year-old. I said, okay, I won't report you to the board. You need to work, you need to support your child. And I adopted him. I adopted him as my student. But he doesn't learn much. I arrived from Europe last Tuesday, and I wasn't feeling well, so I had a video, what do you call these things?
Virtual visit?
Virtual visit, thank you, virtual visit. So virtual visit, he thinks I have a pulmonary embolism and asks for a CAT scan. Okay, now he's gonna be happy, he's being famous, hi. And he orders a CAT scan. If you have a CAT scan in this situation, you should do it what's called STAT. You should do it so that it's done as soon as possible. He doesn't. So this morning, as I'm coming here, I'm speaking with the imaging department at UCSD, and they say the soonest we can get you in is August 9. I said, if I have a pulmonary embolism and I have to wait till August 9 to find out, I might have to reincarnate. It's not going to be very practical to have it then. Your doctor didn't order it stat. He ordered it routine. So I send them a text, and if you want to get the attention of modern medicine, you have to put urgent. Urgent, somebody pays attention. So before I came in here, I was in the restroom, and I get a phone call that he finally got the message and ordered its that for tomorrow. Now, this is an answer to what you were saying. The system is broken. We have given away clinical medicine to insurance medicine. And it makes me cry because that's not the medicine I went to school for. It's what can be fit in at the minimum cost possible. And that, if it doesn't change, it's going to kill more people. You had a question before.
Yeah. How do you integrate all of this being heart first, and embodied? And being heart first, being embodied, everything that you've been talking about into a society like we have, where we do have to work for money. Especially in America, I think there's a lot of people that want purpose and don't know how to find their way.
Can you talk a little louder, please?
Oh. How do we integrate everything that we've been talking about being heart first and embodied into a system where we do have to work for money? And especially in America, I think a lot of Americans are searching for purpose and meaning, but with 40-hour work weeks where they're going to work and only have a few hours after work to rest, how do we integrate this into a society where you have to survive?
You don't. You make a choice. You choose what reality you're going to live in. And it will all align itself to your choice. And this is very courageous to say, because yes, we need to pay rent and we need to pay bills. But let me tell you something. Diamonds don't need to integrate. They have value. When you have settled into the value of your own existence, then you don't have to make money. Money comes. And I tell you this, I graduated 53 years ago. I've never had a moment of lack. And I've never prostituted myself. I've never done what was supposed to be. Now, where do you get the courage? You generate it. You generate it. And how do you generate it? By looking at what is valuable for you. Once you come to terms with what you value, no more prostitution, no more submission, but something else replaces submission, and it's called surrender. Surrender to the higher values. I've raised a family. I've lived very well, physically, emotionally, materially, spiritually, but I prioritize it not of what is told to me that is important, but what I have discovered and honored as importance. And I hear that question so many times, so many times. What do you do?
Me?
You.
I feel like I've struck a good, can you hear me?
No?
I feel like I've struck a good balance.
But then they won't hear you.
We can hear you. Okay. I feel like I've struck a good balance because I'm doing that. I was in tech before, I was making money, and I quit to travel Southeast Asia and learn more about Buddhism and yoga. I've had a meditation practice for 10 years and went more into it. And I work with Rael, helping him with this consciousness research, because that's what I want to do. I want to help humanity become more conscious.
For me
Beautiful.
personally, I feel okay about this journey and I resonate with what you're saying. But I was just thinking more globally, like if we want to get this message across and lower the barrier to entry to thinking about these things and meditation, like I think about all the Americans, most of the Americans in poverty that are living on 10, 20 bucks a day, that have families that they have to support, like that's the motivation for the question.
So you know the answer. You become a living example, and you follow your path, and some people will pay attention, and don't take it personally if some don't. It's only a rate of maturation. But you know that you have to do the work yourself. Nobody's going to do it for you, correct? And you're not going to do it for anybody else either. And that's a hard one, because we are world changers. But you know something? You can only do it for yourself and live it. Be it.
So do we have to depend on other people to be the assholes in the world?
You're addicted to that word, man.
It's a common word, but you think of, if Howard Hughes had lived the way he wanted to live and money was nothing, but yet he left $8 billion to create the second biggest medical foundation in the entire world, which benefits a lot of us, I think, that if he had not pursued that, or should we have let him pursue his pursuit of wealth and substance and then live and die and then leave it to then create something unique or welcome, but maybe Gates will do if there's any money left from this divorce.
You
So
got
do we-
divorced?
do we-
You got divorced?
No, I mean, do we rely on those people?
Wait,
I mean,
what,
some
he's
of-
single?
Well, he is now, but
Yes.
but we need gatekeepers, because if not, we're gonna get slaughtered. And so can we live within the confines of this imagery that we're trying to convey, but yet depend on other people to do our dirty work, to give us that environment, because we'll never get to.
Wait, you're losing me. What is dirty work?
Oh, kill, defend. There are people out there who want to kill you and people who want to dominate you, but we want to protect ourselves from that. And so we protect our entity of spirituality by having non-spiritual people do our dirty work and create this coalition or this coexistence. Without it, it wouldn't be there in the masses that we have.
Difficult what you're saying, because you're separating we and them.
Or I'm telling my other part of we to go down this other route. And your route is to defend what I want to do. Because without you, it won't happen. So you must make the money, you must create the weaponry, you must fight, you must grow food, you must create the mechanisms that allow me to do that. You must feed millions. I mean, is this something we're
You
destined-
happy?
I got a grant due on Friday. If it gets funded, I'll be very happy. But, I mean, happiness is a state of whatever. It's,
Well, according to Aristotle, happiness is having the right family, the right friends, right health, and some wealth that you can operate.
then
Are you
Nietzsche's-
happy?
Then Nietzsche said, when there's not a nail in my foot, I'm happy. So it's.
But are you happy?
Yeah, I'm modestly happy. I mean, I'm Polish descent, so we're not allowed to be happy. So
Really?
in case the Russians show up. But then again, I could be in Ukraine, and I'm Ukrainian too, but I mean, doing spirituality and all those types of things, but then the Russians show up and screw everything up. So we need those people.
Mm.
It's like a good sports team. You need a thug,
all I can say is that I feel a pain in my chest. I mean, you've spoken twice. There's the assholes and the non-assholes. There's the dirty workers and the clean workers. I mean, I don't see the world like that. I know it's happening in many circumstances. I know what's happening in Ukraine, since you brought up that example. And I have no solution for that. I'd like to get Putin into a room and give him some MDA, not MDMA, MDA. It's a little more powerful, it's a little more conducive to a big heart opening. And I can only say that because that was my first experience with these substances. And I don't think I've taken MDA more than twice in my life. And once was enough to open my heart. Once was enough. Who's done MDA? MDA, 1, 2, 3 people. Powerful, huh? It was on a July 11th. And when I was a little kid, I thought I was going to die on July 11th. I'm talking about when I was 7 or 8 years old. And every year that July 11 would pass, I know it's coming up soon, and I survived it, you know, I would do a, yes. My uncle would give me this long calendar, big calendars, and I would press it. So maybe it was that July 11 that I took MDA that I died to the distinctions of me and the others. I knew that there was another in me and me in the other, and we're all one. We're really all one. It's not just a slogan.
Question. Do you feel like there is an anemia, like a spiritual anemia of that experience? Like people say they have the experience that they're connected to everything, but they're just saying it because everybody's saying it, but they haven't had it yet. Like there's actually a really deep lack of it in our society.
How would I know? I don't know.
I have a question about you're a psychiatrist and also, you know, talking about psychedelics. How do you see those two worlds? Where does one start? Where does the other one end? When I think of psychiatry, it's like 100-year-old, you know, philosophy, and now we're in a new age. And when I talk to friends of mine or people that they've reached the end of the psychiatrist or counseling or whatever you, and then it seems that psychedelics are the door at the end of that. So how do you see those two worlds combining?
I had the good fortune of studying in Chile, where we studied psychedelics in the psychiatry residency, 1973. So we experienced it ourselves, and then were let loose to experiment with those that wanted to experiment in. So to me, they were not so separate. But I said I had the good fortune because I also came to the States later, and everything seemed to be very separate. I think it's a matter of maturation and not having the different stages, as I was speaking before, the emotional and the spiritual and the psychological and the emotional maturation coming more together. Were you in the room when I was speaking about that?
Yeah.
And psychiatry has the good intention of helping. So does the rest of medicine. Now, psychedelics have been used for thousands and thousands and thousands of years as initiatory means. Initiatory of what? Of opening up one's consciousness to different dimensions of beingness. Now, if that can be added to someone that wants to help in the medical field or in the psychological field or in any field, you know, actually my therapist in psychedelics was a sculptor, wonderful human being. He was an artist. He had no training in psychiatry, and he gave me a lot. Why? Because he had, and this is the underlying point, he had the experience in himself. He had subjected himself, instead of looking at the world from an external position, as being the protagonist and feeling himself. Never became a psychiatrist, never became a psychologist. So, I don't know, I might be wrong, but I don't see so much separation. I see more of a unified field. I know Einstein didn't get to the formula of the unified field of the fifth dimensional awareness, but spirituality does. I don't know if that answers what you're asking me.
It just seems like psychiatry can only go so far. Only, people are in therapy for many, many years, and psychedelics seem to be a great tool. It's a little like a mechanic can design a car, but a car driver, has the experience of driving that car. You can't, those are two different worlds. But it seems like one could help the other, as you're saying.
But you talk about psychedelics as an experience. It is an experience. It's the experience of the brain. ECT is an experience. And some people, it is their spiritual awakening. Patients who are incredibly depressive, ECT works wonderfully for them. So it's an experience of the brain. And, one of the challenges we always have is, should we experience everything if we want to be an expert in it? I'm an expert in neurodegenerative diseases, but I certainly as hell don't want to have Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. And I don't think I have to experience it in order to understand its depths. So could I understand, or could someone understand psychedelics and the experience without taking it?
I don't think so. Can you be pregnant without having a pregnancy?
But I can understand pregnancy. I understand all the complications, and I can make sure that you have a safe birthing.
I tell you, I don't understand pregnancy.
Uh,
I've seen a
As a
few.
biologist, I have a pretty good concept of it, but
Yeah,
but,
but
I mean,
concept can lead to a construct, but it doesn't lead to the first-hand experience.
but we do that all the time. I'm watching the Stanley Cup will be on the bar when we go home tonight. I can certainly appreciate and experience it, but I've never scored a goal in a Stanley Cup game. But yet I can feel it and understand it. And, if I was Wayne Gretzky, maybe I would have experienced it.
Maybe. I certainly don't agree, nor have I had the experience of giving birth, but I've been present to 4 of them very intimately. And I respectfully submit that to my wife. I don't know what that is. I don't know. And I did my course of obstetrics and gynecology, and I had to do 60 C-sections in my training. But I don't have the foggiest idea of what that is, capital I. Capital I-S. And I think that we need to become a little more respectful with honoring that we don't know because we know about.
Carlos, I'm here by your side.
Thank you.
I want to say if you were just because it's, we're a little over time, 5:30.
Is it 5:30?
It's a little after, yeah. 5:40 now? And
Never thought I would make it.
so just to respect your time, but also everyone else who may have things to get to. I just say a word about one of the kind of dynamics that I hear in the question and answer is really just this essential questioning of, well, what's the relevance of these kinds of experience, of experiencing the universe within yourself? What's the relevance of that to the real world? And how, if that's somehow real and not just a figment of your imagination, then how does it change how we're gonna be relating with each other. And isn't it just a crazy paradox that we're killing each other if that's the case? And how could it be the case, given that's what we're doing? We're killing each other. Come on, give me a break. And so how to live one's life that's connected to that, and what would life look like if that realization were true for more of us, for all of us, right? So I feel like that's a dynamic tension that comes into being when you start really either having those experiences yourself as an individual, or thinking about, reading about, and understanding, others. And I think you've fielded those questions in a very skillful way. And my own perspective, I'd like to hear your thoughts on it, but that the bottom line is none of us know. There are a lot of us who've experienced that level of reality, that it's this experience of, you're always just there with yourself. It's a delusion that, there's this me and us and then me and you. That's not fundamentally true. And yet, here we are, this kind of me and you world, kind of, it seems so real. But we don't know how it's gonna change things if more people are experiencing that in a real way. We don't know, or what that transformation may look like over space and time in human evolution. We really don't know. And the one thing you said that I feel is most kind of closely related, resonant with, something that just feels so relevant for me, is that talking about, you do your work with groups of people, similar to we're doing this work, with groups of people, learning to meditate, and then having, some psilocybin experiences, seeing how that changes their experience of themselves and their experience of, the inner and the outer and that dynamic. But it is through group processes that, the culture changes, right? So I don't know if this is a question so much as a request for any further elaboration of a kind of vision that you can see.
I think that what we're doing now, or we've been attempting to do here last couple of hours, has been done forever throughout different cultures, different civilizations, if we want to call them that way, groups of people. And we don't know the outcome. As you well said, we don't know if everybody does a psychedelic today, if that's going to change the destiny of humanity. But I do know that if we don't do anything to become aware of awareness, aware of ourselves, aware of each other, we're not doing too well. The brain forest in which we are is very polluted. I don't mean LA only. The brain forest in which we are navigating is not really giving the next generation hope for the future. I think my generation had the hope for the future of being a professional, of being able to contribute, of being able to give something. I don't see that happening with the teenagers of today. And I'm not saying let's give all the teenagers, instead of education, a psilocybin experience. I'm not saying that. But something interesting, Rael, is that you mentioned that we were here over our time. That's why when I work with groups of people in these summits, or whatever we call them these days, we work forever. We have no clock. We have no time. We work 40 hours in 4 days. And people say they pass so fast because there's an immersion in the inquiry. And the more, I think, we immerse ourselves in our own inner inquiry, the better human beings we might become for others and ourselves. I didn't notice it was, and I'm not feeling well, remember?
Well, I really thank you for coming.
I thank you for the invitation.
Bring everyone's attention to the fact that Carlos has also brought some books that he has written over the years. I guess he's also giving some access to
The website.
the website. You can see more about his teaching, what he does. But I think you're planning to hang out for a bit.
Little bit, because I have to drive a couple of hours.
The
And
original plan was to stay for dinner, but with the way that you're feeling, it's not seeming like the right
no,
idea.
no.
So hang out for a little bit and maybe sell
Yes,
some books and
yeah.
ask some questions. And then those of us who have, there's some of you in the room who know who you are, who have planned to go for dinner, and we'll go for that after.
And I'm sorry I can't go, but 2.5 hours driving back to, and I have a CAT scan tomorrow.
Spiritually, we'll all be there.
Thank
I'll
you,
feel it. I'll feel your presence.
thank you, thank you.
So why didn't Charles Manson become a good person with his LSD experiences?
Why didn't he become?
Or was he a good person? We just listened to him.
I don't think he was a good
Okay,
person.
good. I agree.
But I don't think he was not a good person because of the LSD or without the LSD. That was his own.
He was like mommy or daddy love, some embodied way.
Problem. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Khan, and thank you very much for being here this afternoon. And if I can be of any service, if you go to my website and go to info, I answer those emails personally. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
Feel
you.
better, huh?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for being brilliant journey.
Thank you for being here.